Okay. Aloha and welcome to I Teach 808, Empowering Hawaii's Teachers in Technology Conference, sponsored by the Augustine Educational Foundation and Sacred Hearts Academy of Honolulu. My name is Derek. I'll be facilitating the session. We are so honored to have Mark Hines join us today to share his expertise through a 45-minute presentation called You Said What? You Said What? Using observational data on video conferencing as a means to strengthen assessment. Please be aware, we'll be recording the session. If you don't like being recorded, you may consider turning off your camera during the session or reviewing the recording afterwards. The recording will be made available on YouTube and shared on iTeach 808's website a week after this event. Without much further ado, I'll turn it over to Mark.
Awesome, thank you. Whoop, I'm going to stop sharing for a second because I told myself I was going to remember to turn the audio on, and then I didn't click it as I was doing that. So here, let me do that one more time. There. Can I just get a thumbs up to see if you're seeing that screen right now? Give me 1 second here. I can't see my own screen because I hid my. Where is it? Hold on. There. You were kind of buried underneath a bunch of windows there. Now I can see you all. So can I see one more time? Can you see the screen okay? Awesome. Thank you, Deborah. I appreciate it. So we're going to talk about observational assessment. One of my passions in the work I do is around the ideas of how we use assessment, and we'll talk a bit about that. So if you saw the description of the session, I just want to point out the real key things that we're going to do with this time together. We're going to talk a bit about formative assessment and how it plays such an important role in the process of learning. We're going to talk about the idea of triangulation, if you're familiar with it or not, of the means by which we collect evidence of learning. We're going to look at one particular aspect of, zero in on one particular aspect of triangulation, which is observation. And we're going to talk about both how we create the kind of language that we're needing to get, how it supports the cases we make for the evidence towards learning. And then I've got some examples to show you and some resources, which I hope you'll find useful if you think this is something you want to add to your tool belt. So that's sort of how we're going to spend our time together here. And before we jump into that, I just want to give a quick thanks. As Derek mentioned, the Augustine Foundation has been fabulous in making this conference happen and putting the financial resources necessary to make it possible for everyone to attend for free. And the idea of doing this with Laura Loshiro sort of leading the effort with Sacred Hearts Academy has just been really great for us as local teachers to support our own work and learn from each other. So I'm just so appreciative of that. At the end of the workshop today, I encourage you to go to the iTeach 808 website. It's just iteach808.com. And there's a link on the left sidebar that has the survey, and that will let you give feedback, not for this workshop specifically, but for the conference as a whole and the kinds of experiences you had. So we want to encourage you to do that because that's what helps us, the Augustine Foundation, continue to fund this because they can see the data for the teachers that use it. So before we jump into the work, I just want to get a quick idea of who's in the room. I just want to start in my own case. And I think if everyone's willing, we can use microphones since there's only the three of us or the four of us with me. Just, you know, I can see your names, but just if you would tell me a little bit about your role and maybe how many years you've been in that role. And just a quick thing about what's one of your favorite ways to recharge your battery. So what we'll do is we'll hand off to each other if we're okay with that. So I'll start, and I'm going to ask Jolene to go next, since you were the first one in the waiting room, Jolene. But I've been here at Mid-Pacific Institute for 37 years and been a teacher for 40 years, mostly in math, science, technology, STEM fields, high school, and a little bit of middle school. And the last 10 years have really been working closely with teachers around the state of Hawaii and actually around the world in thinking about ways to put project-based learning and deeper learning in their classroom. And my favorite way to recharge my batteries is to get on the water. I'm a canoe paddler, and actually right now my canoe paddling team, the Mid-Pacific Boys paddling team, is out on the water with my other coaches. So I'm not at practice today, but I usually recharge by getting out there and hopefully spending time with some young kids that are learning to develop a passion for being on the water. So with that, let me turn it over to Jolene. And Jolene, can you tell us just role, years, and something that recharges your batteries?
Yeah, give me a second here. Let me turn my screen on.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jolene, and I actually teach at Sacred Hearts Academy, and I am right now I have grade 2, but I've been teaching for, I don't know, over 20 years, I guess. I think I started off with the early childhood is actually my background. So I started off with kindergarten, and then don't ask me how, but somehow I jumped from kindergarten to grade 7. I ended up in the middle school. So I don't know how I got there. And then I was in the middle school for about, 10 years or so. Took a break, had my family, and then I came back to the elementary, and in between I did different things. I went back to school. I got, my master's in science and just, different things. But I was always drawn back to education. So I ended up back at Sacred Hearts in grade 2. So it's sort of I guess I went in a circle, so to speak. As far as recharging, well, I have my 2 dogs that keep me busy. I actually like, when I come home, I normally like to, go in the garden, get some fresh air, rake some leaves. And then, my dogs are good because it forces me to exercise and take them to the park and walk. So that's my exercise every afternoon and in the mornings. And then, I cook dinner. So that's basic. And if I have time, I correct papers. And if I have time, I'll watch a little bit of television. And then I start all over again the next day.
With the dogs, it keeps you rich and busy because they'll keep you attentive. So awesome.
They do, unconditional love. That's what you call it.
Amen. Who do you want to
Thank
have
you.
go next in the room? We've got 3 other folks. So you pick.
Oh, I see my favorite, my fellow teacher, Deborah. So I'm going to go to you, Deborah.
Thank you, Jolene. I had a feeling I was going to be next. So, okay. So thank you, Jolene. I kind of like this. It's kind of nice, small group, you feel like, yeah, you can kind of just relax. So I'm Deborah, and I also teach at Sacred Hearts. I teach ESL or ELL in the lower school. So I have learners as young as 4 years old in the preschool, and then we go up to 6th grade in the lower school. So just depending on who is coming each year, I get all grade levels, which is really kind of fun because, it kind of, you kind of have to do different things for different age groups and abilities. I've been teaching for quite a while, mostly ESL. I've taught public school ESL. I've taught in Japan, high school ESL on the JET program. So yeah, I mean, it's something that I really am passionate about, is helping those kids kind of, feel successful, because it's not easy, right? To be successful and to kind of build their strengths, and then in a few years you just see them fly, and it's very gratifying. I also teach a resource when I have room in my schedule. I help some who are struggling mostly with reading and writing. And I'm sorry, I'm kind of going on and on. All right, favorite way to recharge is, well, a good night's sleep is always the best, but I think for the mental aspects, if I can get out to the beach, on a hike, quiet, connect with nature, that's very, very good. So
Lovely.
Okay, thanks for listening.
Sure.
So I guess next up is Eland. Am I saying it right?
And when we don't have a screen on, sometimes we're not sure if they got called away. I know sometimes it's time of the day. So we say, hey, Linda, you there? Or just want to double check, and we'll move on to Wendy if not. So, okay.
Okay.
Oh, wait, there's Wendy. Okay.
Aloha, everyone. My name is Wendy Oliver, and I'm a senior instructional technology specialist at Kamehameha Schools. So I support with a team of, we're a team of 4. We support all of our preschools statewide with educational technology, support the teachers with their technology, and then integration, iPad integration. So I've been doing that almost 9 years. Before that, I was a 2nd grade teacher. in Dallas, Texas. My favorite way to recharge my batteries, I would say going for a walk with either music or a podcast. I think those two things can be really motivating.
What's your favorite podcast to listen to?
Oh my gosh.
Always looking for new podcast recommendations.
Have you heard of the history of, is it the history of English? I think that's
No.
what it's called. It's so neat. I think I might be saying the wrong name. I'll look it up and put it in the chat.
Yeah, do. I
But
would
it's
love to
just,
hear that.
it's so neat because you learn about these words and where they came from. And then you
Oh,
start to even put things together in life, like, oh, that's why that's called that and that's called that. It's just the history like of words. It's pretty neat.
wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Linda, if you jump in, just if you want to put anything in the chat, if you come back, we want to just make sure you feel like your voice is included here as well. So let us know. Well, thank you so much for that. It's always worth time. And I know this is one of the things we talk about, right, is we learned in the age of COVID that before we can get kids to just focus on learning, we need to be inclusive and think about the ways that we bring people into our environments. And even though today's session is a short one, it's always worth the time to give everyone a chance to be recognized and share a little bit about who they are. I'm going to cut this time just a little on this because there's only 4 of us in the session. But what I'm going to ask you to do right now is you came to this session obviously interested in this idea of observational assessment. And so I want you to just take a couple of minutes. So I'm just going to put on a 3-minute timer. And I'm going to ask you to do 2 things in those 3 minutes. The first is just to take a little time and write. We always find it really critical when we sit down and with staff members and start is where are we at right now? Where's our presence around our thinking on this topic so that that helps us focus and think about what we want to take away. So what are your current thoughts about that? So just take a couple minutes. You can type or write to that. And then in the midst of that, think about what might be 3 to 5 words that would sum up, your thoughts about it or your needs, like why you're here today, or even just a question you might have about, it says the word portfolio is there. I'm not sure why I didn't change that, but the idea of observation in the work that you're doing, because between ESL or ELL for you, Deborah, or for what you're doing to support preschool, Wendy, or even for Jolene, what you're doing with your second graders, what is that thing that maybe you hoping that you can get from today? So I'm going to start 3 minutes right now, and somewhere in there just type into the chat that as well. Okay, and I'm going to do the same. About a minute more. And again, if you're close to the end of sort of writing your thoughts, I'd love to see what in the chat, just what you're thinking about, where that thinking took you. Thanks, Alin. I'm glad you're with us. I want to make sure that you're engaged in this. So I appreciate you putting into the chat. Linda, if you wouldn't mind putting in what school you're at and what your role is, I'd love to hear that as well in the chat if you would. So I see, Deborah, you're talking about just ways of understanding where your students are at and using observation for that. And I appreciate, we will talk specifically about video, though we're going to start with a bigger question about assessment, Lynn. So I hope that's okay, because they're just inextricably linked, right? But whether we're face-to-face or in virtual environments, some of those things are still the same. So thank you for taking the time to think about that. I'm going to do a little bit of background work here to set the context for what we're going to eventually zero in on, which is in what ways are we observing. So one of the things I said is we have a bias in our work towards student-centered work. And one of the things that we do, thanks, Alin, I see that. Oh, you're from Hanalani, wonderful, welcome. It's great to have you here. So we have a wide range. We have upper school from Hanalani, and we've got pre-K all the way down with KS. So we've got a wide range of teachers, which is great for different perspectives. The idea that we use these things called the deeper learning competencies. This is one of the things that in the work that I do, particularly with teachers, is we really ask. So can I just get, since your cameras are off, this is okay, you can just put it in the chat. On a scale of 1 to 5, 1 meaning never heard of it, because this could be a fist to 5, but we'll put it in the chat with just 4 of us. Just what's your familiarity with this idea of the deeper learning competencies? 1 meaning I haven't even heard of them, don't even know what they are. 5, oh yeah, we use these in my classroom or in my school, and we talk about this in developing instruction all the time. Can I get a sense of that from you? I see a 4 from Deborah. And see relatively new. We're going to use this for the practice exercise we're going to do in just a couple minutes here. So that's the reason I wanted to ask. And I see a 2 from Wendy. So the information's up here and it'll be on the construction activity we're going to do together in just a minute. But I just want to point out that there's different ways that people articulate deeper learning, but the idea of deep learning is really significant. One of my favorite authors is Jay McTighe, of Understanding by Design fame. And this is his latest book about teaching for deeper learning. And this idea that when we're doing good instructional design work with our students, we're pushing them to show us how they know what they know. So this idea of in what ways are students applying information, not just doing lower level Bloom's taxonomy memorization and filling out worksheets, but can they take what they've learned and use it in new situations? Can they apply the information in interesting ways? Are they using communication as a means to demonstrate what they know? This is going to be critical for this idea of observation, because students in the process, we're going to be both listening and observing, seeing the things that they're doing. Are there ways in which students are developing their critical thinking skills around what they're learning? So whether it's like in your case, Lynn, Spanish, and they're putting that language to use and they're thinking about maybe tense and verb or the appropriate structure of sentences, or in early childhood education, we see students develop their thinking around the connection between what they observe in the real world and the ways that they explore it. So how do we see that happening? We provide in many ways opportunities for students to work together, because we know learning is a collective exercise. The idea of knowledge gets constructed when students have to measure and assess, to compare and contrast, to differentiate. And we know that when they're collaborating, that exhibits itself, and we see that for observation as well. And then these last 2 are the really interesting ones for that sort of mindset 21st century skill set. The idea that when we give students clarity around what we want to see, that creates opportunities for them to know how they should be behaving. Again, we're trying to move away from us being the focus of attention to turning our look to what they're doing and observing what's happening. And the idea that when students have clarity around that, there's an equity lens that we're always aware of, that when students have clarity around what we need to be seeing, when they know what observation is being used, then that gives them the ability to have a sense of knowing how to be successful. And we know that really pushes them up. So this deeper learning competencies go really even further than that in the work we do, but it's a very specific way to sort of frame our thinking, in this case about observation. But in all the work I do when I design lessons for my students, I'm thinking about these for all of the ways that they're experiencing the learning in the subject areas. So in this idea of assessment, which is what we're using observation for, you might be familiar with this graphic of, we oftentimes, in our experience, mine in school was, there was one size fits all kind of learning that happened. If it was in math class, there was a test, and that was the only way that observation, or only way that assessment was going to happen, a chapter test at the end of the unit. And everything else up to then, the teacher was like, it doesn't matter, the test was the only means by which I gathered information that will tell me how you did. And the idea that we know from the research on learning about the way the brain's constructed, how learners have different capabilities and dispositions, learn at different rates, can respond to different kinds of inputs and outputs with different sensory, whether it's auditory or visual or creatively by drawing, that if we open up our opportunities to think about assessment, then we can go deeper with students to help them think about how to do that work. So as you're going to think about observation in assessment right now, we use the phrase assessment in the service for learning. So in other words, the focus isn't, we're not putting a grade on student work most of the time. Most of the work we're doing is in the service of the student understanding where they're at and where they need to go next. And for us as teachers to know where they're at and what instructional moves will help them best next. And observation fits into that. By the way, this slide deck is posted in the iTeach 808 website in the schedule. So if you see anything here that you want to go back to, most of these things have links embedded in them. So like this Susan Brookhart article, which talked about why formative feedback, which observational data is a critical component of, is so important, and when you do it. And so when we do observational data, it's not hidden from the students as something we hold on to until they get their summative assessment, but we use it regularly as a means to give students feedback about how they performed in class. And when I do this work with my students, I'll show you an example of a checklist that I had in my classroom. Students would come up to me regularly and say, how did I do today? Did I really apply the information well? Did I build on other students' ideas? So they were both aware of the language of the assessment data, and they were desirous to get feedback on it because they knew that I was turning my look toward how they were doing this work. So these kinds of things about considering questions, not statements, or describe, don't judge. So, I liked what you did today is very different than, I noticed you were building on your partner's ideas today. So we use descriptive language so that they know what we're looking for, and we're not judging things, but we're giving them what their next step and their just right step is in their work. So I encourage you to think about that, those sort of why these formative feedback processes are so critical. So before we dive in here, this last piece here is just a recognition of this idea of triangulation. When we are in our classrooms and we're collecting evidence of student learning, which is really, we're in charge of leading the learning and setting the context for how students are learning, and then we're asked to gauge how well our students are performing, we have these three different pieces of assessment that we can leverage. The most classical ones are the products, right? A test, a quiz, an essay, but there's lots of other ways that we can collect that evidence from them that are products. It could be a look in their journal and to see where they're at. It could be an exit ticket where they summarize something and give it to us. So what do those pieces look like? What are the conversations that we have with students and we observe students happening, which ties into the observation piece. So here's where we're going to focus, right? This idea of, what can we observe in our classrooms that give us some really significant information about learning? And I want to be clear, when we're talking about observing, just like all the rest of this, we're always talking about learning targets. So unless we're assessing on behavioral standards, like the student, was seated and that's part of our assessment, The observation we're going to focus on today is the observations that we see that are tied to the learning outcomes that are part of our coursework, our classes. So we're going to do an activity right now to sort of practice putting this into play. And then I'm going to show you how an activity like this with the group that we worked with recently this fall helped us build out with teachers better clarity around what their observational tools look like. So that's where we'll spend the last 20 minutes of our time here. So there's a Jamboard. I'm going to stick a link in the chat right now for you. So let me go dig that up right now and put that in the chat. This Jamboard, if you're familiar with Jamboards, and if not, they're really easy to use. I'll walk you through using that in a minute, but I just want to make sure you can get in there. So I'm going to go and just open that Jamboard up right now. So this Jamboard is made out of 6 frames. My understanding was there were some people that presented on Jamboards in the conference. So I can see at least someone else is in there right now. So I'll explain in a moment what you're going to do with this. But the really just quick rundown for Jamboards is on the left side of the Jamboard, if I'm hoping you can see my cursor there, there are a couple of tools that you might use. One is a sticky note, which you can just, when you click on it, it allows you to put text and then it just becomes a part of that frame of the Jamboard. So there's one there. I'm going to delete that since it's just a test one. There's also a text box feature, which is down near the bottom, which when you click on here, you can just put text on that way. So there's a couple different ways to create text and to put other objects, but we're just going to work with the text aspect of Jamboard today. So we'll go back. I'll explain what we're going to do with Jamboard in a minute. There's a whole bunch of great resources to help teachers think about what is the language of action? What are the observable things that we can see students doing? I have loved, since we're talking about technology at this conference, Alan Carrington's work out of Australia. He built this tool called the Pedagogy Wheel. It's a bit out of date these days. This is really from work he had done about 5 years ago. But the thing I want you to see is there's apps on the outside of the circle. The inside of the circle is Bloom's taxonomy. But outside of that, there's a whole set of action verbs that are the things that are if I am doing, for example, and I'm going to look up close here, remembering, that I might be having students tabulate or label or decorate or bookmark. So there's language that becomes the observable things. Like these are the action things we see students doing. And so when we build observation instruments, we really try to think about what are the observable things that I can see students do that are indicators of learning. So whether it's this, there's lots of other examples of Bloom's taxonomy verbs that go with it. I just happen to favor this one because then if you're really interested, you can look out here on that outer rim. So when you get this slide deck, which is posted, there's a link, you can see it here on the bottom for this. And so you can find that in the slide deck when you go there. So I'm going to have you right now observe a classroom. And I want you to think about, there's all different ways that we could be observing for phenomena right now. I'm going to go back to the deeper learning competencies because on that Jamboard you saw, there are 6 slides and those 6 slides are labeled mastery of content, collaboration, communication, problem solving, mindset. And so I want you to be watching this video to ask yourself, where do you see the learning happening? And then I'm going to ask you to go to the Jamboard for a little bit and think about what might be the language of observation that you would want to look for. So I'll use a specific example in a minute here, but let me show you the video. This video is about 40 minutes long. It's a classroom all the way through, shot nonstop. I'm going to show you just the first 2 minutes of the teacher introducing the lesson, and then I'm going to cut over to 3 minutes of when the students are actively engaged in this activity about force and motion. So let me show you this real quick. And then your observational skills is what I'm asking to use right now. So I know the first 2 minutes, don't worry, the teacher is just talking, but you need to sort of see how she sets the context. But when we cut over to the students in action, I want you to think about where do you see the observational phenomena happening that are indicators of student learning on this topic of force and motion. So here, let me show you a little bit of this. Can I ask, first of all, can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear this? I want to make sure.
Okay, Guys, we're going to get back into science. I know we've done some reading. Where is your science journal? All science journals. I'm seeing about 3 people journals on their desks. Okay, good, good. And I see those prepared. Excellent. Okay. Who can tell me what we have been, what unit of study we've started in science? Who can tell me? Yes.
Motion and design.
Motion and design. What is motion? What does that mean? Yes.
It has like forces. It's force.
What do you mean motion has force? Explain what you're talking about.
So I'm going to stop it there. So you can see she's setting the context for the lesson. So as the students become engaged, then they've already got their baseline of sort of here's what we've done in the past. So we're doing recall, some of the good practices we know are part of good instruction. But I'm going to zip ahead here right now to, I can look at my own notes here, to the 25th minute, where we're going to see the students engaged in trying to create designing cars that can move under a force. And I want you to be the observer now and think about what are the things you see, hear, that you're noticing that are giving you as the observer, the teacher as the observer, evidence of learning that's being applied here. So for 3 minutes, I'm just going to let this play right now.
There you go. Okay.
How does this go?
You hook it onto the axle.
Greg, are you done writing? Let me see if you're done. Okay, it moved a little bit. Okay, it moved 15 centimeters. Right. Press it on there. Okay, where do I put it? Where do I put it again? You need 2 more. Yeah, 2 more. I think it'll only take. Let's do 16. I think it'll only go to 8 till it hits. What was that? 3? What was that? 4? Hold that. About 60. 69. We only put 69.
I like the way some are recording what they saw. Excellent. Did you record what you saw?
Okay, now I got it. No, look. Now you pull it. It's wrinkled like my camera. I know. But look, you let it go. Just let it go. Let it go. Let it go. No. No. Kelly, let it go. Pull it back all the way up again. Let it go.
Okay, let's try it again. All right. Now, wait a minute. Hold there. Okay.
Let it go. 1, 2, 3. Let it rip.
Oh, that's cool.
Okay.
It didn't go nowhere.
All right. All right. Then you can write that down. You can try this side if you want. Why don't you try this side?
Okay.
That's better. It looks like these desks are a little more easy.
Get the car. I got it. I got it. Here, just let it have to sit. That one on there. And somebody can hold the tape measure down there. Right here we are. It made it right to the 62. 62.
No, it went in the middle.
So we need to write down our response.
So we could look at more, but I just want to give you a quick view because we're talking partly about how, imagine now that you're in a Zoom and your students are doing something collaboratively in breakout rooms. So you're still able to do this kind of thing where through video, you can observe what's happening by seeing what's the conversation and what's going on. So I want to give you just a couple minutes. Let me get out of this full screen so we can go back to the slide. So I want you to go to the Jamboard right now. And here's the activity I want to do for just a couple of minutes here. And then I'm going to show you examples of what this looks like when it plays out. But it's worth taking a couple minutes. So again, the Jamboard link is in the chat. And what I want you to do is to think about what actions did you see students doing that are indicators of them that we might want to do. So on each frame, there's the first one is labeled content mastery. So I might say, for example, I heard a student used terminology correctly. like they mentioned force in an appropriate way. So maybe that's an observational piece that I can capture when I see them in using the content mastery correctly. Or if I was in effective communication, I might have seen, communication is two-way. So I might have seen student listens and responds to peer appropriately. And forgive my typos because I'm typing fast. So I want to just give you a couple minutes to practice doing this, because if you're in the midst of thinking about how might you do this work, we're going to talk in a little bit about, this isn't just something you do, this is something you do with your students to clarify as well. So take a minute and see if you can do at least one or two of these. If there were 20 people in the room, we would populate this with lots of examples. When we do this in large workshop settings, then we get a lot more feedback on this. But even though there's only 4 of us, just take a minute and see if you can add 1 or 2 to this. And if you can't get on the Jamboard, let me know. And if you put it in the chat, I'll stick it in there for you. Good, I can see more of you have jumped into the Jamboard here. And I know time-wise, we've got about 10 more minutes in our time. This 45-minute sessions go real fast, but I want to at least give you a chance to think about how these are things that I would do with my students. I'm treating you like my students right now because I'm asking you, what would I be looking for if you're doing this well? So this isn't just a conversation I'm having with myself or a teaching colleague. I'm also doing these same things with my students to clarify the language of assessment. Let's see if we've got anything on here. Try to see if we can get one posted for each of you. I'm putting one right now under students use teacher feedback to monitor and direct their learning. So I might add here, students manage, resources appropriately to complete the task. And that's something I thought I typed that in. I obviously wasn't clicked in. So I see someone put talking to a partner, making changes as needed. So can you, again, we're a short session here. When we do this workshop, we did it over a 12-hour span where we really built these out with teachers. So you're seeing a very, very compressed timeline of this and the work we're doing. But these kinds of clarity around what do we want to observe happening help us get clarity for us. What are we focusing our attention on? What are the things we should be looking for in our classroom? And then we make an intentional effort to make those happen. So for the sake of time, I'm going to move on, but all of these things will be linked and you're welcome to come back to these because they're all going to stay live. They're for you to go back and look at after. So I'm going to give you a quick example of how we did this and how this tied especially to video assessment and what we were doing. So our admissions department at Mid-Pacific used to just have a case where a student was interviewed by a faculty member and then they did a writing sample. And we understand as a school that we also want to know how that student works in teams and how in working in teams, they can exhibit more of the behaviors that help us understand what kind of a learner they are. In what ways do they grapple with challenge? How do they communicate effectively? Things that don't come out in just a single adult to child interview. So we started in Zoom designing a challenge for students where they had to work together to solve a problem. And in the process of that, the admissions team needed the teachers who were observing these students to come up with a language of what did I see here that's helpful for us? And so the admissions team gave us some specific things. Do they exhibit communication skills? Do they show empathy? Do they collaborate well? Do they have a resilient mind frame? And so this teaching team that you see here that we worked with over a series of Saturday workshops started to get clarity around what that looks like. we started by sort of showing them this really quick video as this, oftentimes we're so focused on our teaching that we realize the real value is understanding our students. This is just a minute long if you haven't seen this, but it sets the context.
1 minute, 1 minute, please. Time, thank you. Could you all please put down your pens and bring your papers to the front of the room?
Very familiar setting for those of us
Well
that
done.
grew up in traditional
Thank you.
education, right?
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, you're too late. Gave you plenty of warnings about time. You failed. Sorry.
Excuse me, do you know who I am?
I have absolutely no idea.
Good.
Obviously a lesson there about sometimes knowing our students helps us better understand. So the work we did with these teachers over the 4 Saturdays was, how do we build a good assessment tool, actually prototyping it and testing it. We used it on a variety of performance tasks, and then the teachers designed a whole set of ones like that. So there's a few things, again, in the slide deck, if you want to go back to, some of the readings we gave the teachers are listed here that help them think about the language of assessment, some of the same things that we were looking at earlier, and some deeper understandings of formative assessment. A jigsaw reading of different ways to approach assessment, including that Brookhart article I mentioned earlier. And then we did a fishbowl. So we actually, and I've done this with my students, where we had the students do a task. In this case, we had 3 of the teachers do a task, and the rest of us observed, much like what we just did with that video example, to look at how do you capture the language of what we see here? How can we agree on that? And so when we did that, these were the areas that the admissions folks wanted us to talk about. Are they self-directed? Do they have an academic mindset? Do they effectively communicate? Do they have critical thinking and problem solving? And so for each one of those, the teachers constructed language around what they thought that should look like. So here you see things like assess their own work, demonstrates curiosity, ask questions. So that was fitting under that self-directed learning. Now for you in a Spanish class, for example, Elind, or for you that are looking at like ELL, your criteria might be different, and how would you observe that? But for these teachers, this is what they saw. And so when we were talking about this, we wanted to make sure that we had an understanding of, when we do this with our students, the research shows really clearly all of these things come out of that. From, it helps us figure out how to teach more effectively because we know what we're looking for. So that sets the context for instruction, to clarity around for students what they're being assessed on, to the fact that it's equitable, because when students have clarity around what's being observed, then it levels the playing field, and students that struggle in traditional classrooms have a much higher rate of success when we've clarified the assessment practices with them. So when we finished with this group, this is what the draft originally looked like. We took all those Post-it pads and we grouped them. And as we looked at this instrument, we realized students would never be able to make sense of this. It's way too complicated. And so we spent time working with students, asking what they saw in this work. And what we ended up with was a 1-page document. And I've linked these so you can, when you go to the here, but I just want to read this first one for you. So under creativity, we had 3 things that the teachers were observing. Do the students come up with innovative solutions? Do they consider possibilities? Do they make connections between ideas and concepts? And what we found was keeping the language simple, making it action-oriented, and making it less than, in this we had it's a 20-minute observation round. And in that time, a teacher felt like they could do 3 students. Now in my classroom, when I do this, I have a very different instrument that I use, because I do maybe 6 students in a class period, and I rotate which students I look at from time to time so I can see it. But this is what the teachers came up with. So you'll see these examples when you look at the slide deck. So one of the teachers was interested in, this was actually in an ELL classroom. So that's kind of fits with our ELL teacher here, that this idea that they do book discussions. And so they looked at what are the knowledge and analysis? What are the ways they communicate? How do they collaborate? And she uses this as a means to collect that evidence in the book discussions. This is the one that I had developed. They're abbreviated here, but it's, do they build on each other's ideas? Do they problem solve? Do they use resources well? Do they ask questions? And so we fishbowled this with my students so they could see how would it look and how would I observe this, so students could use that language to say, how did I do today solving problems? Did you see me? I actually did this work where we couldn't get data collect correctly because the thermometer wasn't working right. We figured out it's because the thermal contact was bad. So they can explain to me what they're doing. So there's better clarity for them. One of my colleagues, Kylie, came up with a dialogue for Socratic seminars. And so her observation document looks like this, where the students are posing questions, take a position or a stance using evidence to support their ideas. So all of these are means that they use to collect that data. So the ultimate thing is what we're trying to do is to both create clarity around what that looks like through action verbs, to work with our students so they understand what we're observing for, and then to use that tool to sharpen our focus because that supports our triangulation. It's not the only data we're using to assess learning, but it becomes a new means by which we get insight into how well our students understand what they're doing. And so with that, we're already at our time. It's 5:17. It's a very quick 45 minutes. So I hope some of this was helpful for you. You can definitely reach out. The work that I do is under kupaho.midpack.edu, but you can find my email address. If any of these documents, if you find you'd like more information, reach out to me. I'd love to share it with you. Part of this work was funded by the Hawaii Online Portal for Education called HOPE. This work will be housed in that portal goes live sometime early this spring. And so if you're interested in being involved with that, there's a link there for the Hawaii Education Online website. There's sessions, workshops that are being run for free, and teachers are paid to put their content into the website. And so reach out to me or to the HOPE initiative if you're interested in getting involved with that. We've been developing some workshops for them, and other folks around town, NOAA and early childhood work has all been being developed for that. So there's lots of great ways for you to continue to stretch yourself and to add these layers to your work. So with that, I'll stay online if you have questions, but I don't want you to feel compelled to stay because it's already 5:15 and that's our end time. So thank you for your time, and I appreciate you coming in on the last day of the last session of the workshop. I hope this was helpful.
Okay, mahalo to Mark, and thank you for everyone for participating. We hope you find the session helpful and made some valuable connections. Please help us complete the survey on iTeach 808 website. I will post it in chat. The survey will be sent to your email addresses that you registered with. Please make sure to check your spam folder for any emails from iTeach 808 Hawaii, iTeach 808 Hawaii@gmail.com. You'll be entered to win one of $25 Target gift cards if you complete the survey by the 4th of February. Thanks for being here. And this is the last session of the day. So have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much for being part of the conference, everyone. We've all been pushed to our limits, and I appreciate you still wanting to learn.
Thank you. Have a great evening, everybody.
Take care, Deborah.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you,
Bye.
Wendy. Thank you, Julene. Thank you, Elin.